Hi everyone, and welcome to Dementia Chats. I'm Lori La Bey, the founder of Alzheimer Speaks, and my mom had dementia for 30 years. That life-changing experience made me switch gears and switch careers. Now I'm an advocate, trainer, speaker regarding dementia and how we give care. So I created Dementia Chats, hear from the experts, the people who are living with the disease. They are the ones who know this disease inside and out and can share with us what it's really like and what they would like the world to be. So we'll go around and have everybody introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Laurie Scher. I was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's and FTD, which is frontotemporal dementia. I'm extremely involved in Dementia Action Alliance and a number of other things because I believe it's important for those of us living with dementia to let our voice be heard and tell people the ins and outs of what it's like and how to care for.
Great, thank you. Pauline?
Hi, my name is Pauline Gordon, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm also on the advisory board for Dementia Action Alliance and involved in a lot of projects that they do. But I think it's really important to speak out and help other people that are living with dementia in whatever way we can.
Great, thank you. And Elon, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Elon Cosby. I've been in the aging field, working in the aging field in different ways for my entire adult life, which is 25 years. But I know that if you really want to understand the lived experience of people living with dementia, you actually need to talk and listen to people living with dementia. And I always thought that Dementia Chats is the cutting edge platform for education and advocacy. So I am always thrilled to be here and to learn from your lived experience. And if there's something that I can share from what I learned along the way, I'll share that too. Thank you.
Thank you. Today we're going to talk about the impact of pain when it comes to dealing with dementia, how that impacts people's reactions and ability to communicate. So, Lori, you had kind of picked this topic. If you wouldn't mind kind of kicking it off, that would be great.
I have a number of issues with my back, and sitting is very painful for me. I've had a number of injections and all kinds of stuff. Pain really does impact. It impacts my dementia. Yesterday, I had a very bad day as far as my cognitive impairment. I couldn't think. I couldn't concentrate. I was very agitated. And a lot of times, I think that is brought on because of the pain. It's hard. When you're in severe pain, it's hard to just ignore it. You can't. And therefore, our processing is always delayed. But when you're in pain, so much focus is on the pain that it makes your concentration even more difficult. I said to my husband the other day, I'm so thankful that I'm still at a point in my dementia where I can say, I have pain in my back hurts. Because then we can go to the doctor and try to get something done or get some medicine. I think of the poor people that no longer can express where their pain is and how they're suffering. I think that must be just a really sad and difficult point to be in.
Lori, one of the things I want to ask you, because you and Roy have done some kind of preliminary sign language, is there a sign language for pain?
Yes. For us, when I can't speak, I can always do pain in my back. And I'm so thankful that we started early, just learning 20 signs, so that when the verbal isn't working, sign language is audio. You see it, or it's not audio, it's visual. You see it. Whereas speaking, you hear it. So it's nice to be able to have that as a backup.
Great, thank you. So pain is something that people can do and then hopefully be able to point to where exactly it is. Pauline, what are some of your thoughts about pain?
Well, I think pain is incredibly distracting. I mean, it becomes the focus of your thinking and your thoughts when you're in a lot of pain. And it becomes very difficult to engage in other activities. You know, your motivation goes down, your thinking goes down, your motivation goes down. When I was hospitalized for the past, for 4 months, I mean, I just really didn't, you almost didn't care about things, anymore, because you're so focused on the pain and so forth. The other thing you have to consider about that is that when you're in a lot of pain, if you're on a lot of pain medications, that's going to affect you quite a bit too. That's something with dementia, especially, you have to be careful with. But the pain medications will suppress a lot of your senses and your thoughts and things like that. So you have to be real careful with the pain medicines too.
That makes sense. Go ahead, Laura.
And it's not just the pain medications. Like, I've had injections in my spine, and the injection takes 10 minutes. I have to have them put me into a light sleep, because if I was laying there while they were doing the injection and my dementia kicked off and my confusion, it could be dangerous to me. So I can't just do the shots without going into a light sleep. But then you need to be careful what they're using to put you into that light sleep, because they could give you something that ends up impacting your dementia, and then you're disoriented for days. So it's a difficult situation. It's hard. You have to really study each medication a doctor wants to give you, whether it's for pain or inflammation, or whatever, because they can really impact you. So you can't just, whatever the doctor gives you, you can't just say, okay, I'll take it. You really need to research it first.
So, Lori, when you say research, are you doing that research yourself, or are you going to a pharmacist and asking them to kind of do an overview?
Both. Roy and I will research it on the internet and look for any comments or things from people living with, in particular, FTD, who have had problems with that medication. And also we talked to the pharmacist to see his input on what it might do with FTD.
Yeah, it would be nice if the doctors would do that check before they give you the medication, or, I mean, just because of some of the cost involved, and then all that extra work for the patient is difficult. But I would imagine also some of these things haven't really been probably researched as much as we think they have, and they haven't been talked about as much, and people are just starting to get some of the connections, with all of this stuff now. So I think that was a really good point to bring up, both of you, about the medications and the adverse reactions that it can have, and each type of dementia can be a little bit different. Ayla, did you have something you wanted to kick in?
I find this topic extremely important. I mean, I also find it interesting that, for me to talk about pain without experiencing severe pain, I don't know how people who don't experience severe pain can educate about, because we don't really. I mean, I don't really know what severe pain is. So I'm more here to learn. I do know that in the realm of assisted livings, nursing homes, and a lot at home as well, a lot of people in mid to late stages of dementia, and people in early stages, particularly those in the more advanced stages, that they have the pain, as was mentioned earlier, it is highly under-recognized. The individuals may not be able to articulate it. They experience it. It impacts them in various ways, emotionally, physically, and it's extremely under-detected. And we know it in nursing homes. It's a big problem. And therefore, there are tools that were developed by researchers to identify pain among people with advanced stages of dementia. through facial expressions, body language, that are pretty good in detecting it and triggering additional assessment and potential treatment. So there are ways. I know that there are resources about pain. One of them is called Try This, that describes the issue of pain and advanced dementia and ways to assess it, and perhaps some of the ways to treat it. Big issue that it's under-recognized and under-treated.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Pauline, and then I'll go to Lori. Have you done anything like meditation or listening to music, or have you found things that help kind of soothe you and not focus on your pain?
I color mandalas a lot, and that's kind of a relaxation for me. And it takes my mind off of things, and it does help me just to take the focus off the pain. But one thing I wanted to mention about on this topic is Lori mentioned briefly the anesthesia that she has to have before she has the injections. Well, I just had some major surgeries, and I had to have quite a bit of anesthesia. And there's a lot to be very careful with anesthesia. I know that there's a lot of information out there that says you can't have anesthesia. But when you're in that situation where you're having major surgery, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? I don't want it. It's very difficult.
Yeah, that would be difficult. Lori, any comment on that?
Well, and how many times did you have anesthesia?
I had 3 surgeries, so I had it 3 times. And each surgery, like the last surgery, was 2.5 hours.
Did you have any problems coming out of it?
Yeah, I did a little bit. I mean, I was very confused, and things like that. But after a while, I seemed to regain my mental capacity again. It was just at the beginning of it that it was difficult.
I'm curious on this. Did you know what anesthesia they were giving you beforehand?
Well, I had a lot of trouble with anesthesia, actually. They were going to give me, for the first procedure where they put a drain in, they were going to give me the sleep time medication instead of the full anesthesia. And that didn't work for me at all. I was fully conscious and I was in tremendous pain during the whole procedure. So after that, I was pretty sure that I needed, next time they were going to do anything on me, I was going to have full anesthesia. I was pretty adamant about it after that, because it was a nightmare.
I just go into the twilight sleep, which is what you had the first time, but you were awake. But for the 10, 15-minute procedure, it works fine. I just go to sleep. But one of the things I do is when I go in, I give them my card, which says I have dementia and please be patient. And we tell them it's imperative that when I wake up, Roy is there. And they've been very good with making sure that Roy is there before I wake up, so that if I'm confused, he's there to help me through it. And I think that's so important, that any time we do have anesthesia, even if it's twilight sleep, that somebody that we love and trust is there beside us when we wake up. And that's important, because if you're in recovery room and you wake up and you're confused, you could rip out your IVs, you could do whatever in your confusion state. Do you agree with that, Pauline?
Totally agree with that. My husband was with me all the time, when I was coming out of surgeries, and he was always there to help me through that confusion. But there is a confusion period that you go through, and you do need some support, somebody solid that's with you, and not a barrage of nurses that you don't know.
I think those are excellent points that you guys are making. I think it's nice if you can know what the medication is ahead of time, but sometimes you might know the medication, but you might not know the dosage, which can also affect everything too, because that can change if it's not taking. Sometimes they'll give you a little bit more. I think that was a great idea to make sure that your loved one is there, as soon as you wake up. That's just it's almost like a life-saving piece, really, because it can be such a time of confusion and angst and discomfort, and to wake up to having somebody there that I think is very, very important. And I'm glad to hear that in your situation, Lori, at least that they were working with that. And Pauline, I think you said your husband was there as well. What have you seen or what have you heard in terms of people with dementia? Because I know you guys interact a lot with care partners and stuff too, with people in pain as they've progressed that maybe can't communicate. Have families spoken to you about how they try to deal with that, or staff? I'm going to start with Lori and then go to Pauline.
First, I want to mention, I believe it was Robert Bowles, but I might be off on that. Somebody was saying the other day that when they went to have a procedure done, they spoke with the anesthesiologist and asked what they were given, and they said, "No, I can't have that." And the anesthesiologist said something like, "You'll be fine," and they walked out. I said, "No." And I think that's important, that there comes times when we or our care partner, as we progress, need to check on the anesthesia beforehand and maybe say, "No, you're not doing that," because that could be important. In this case, it was somebody with Lewy body dementia, which anesthesia can have a heavy impact on them. So it is important to find out what and then say no. I don't really think I've spoken with any care partners that are dealing with someone in pain as they progress. I can't think of anyone right now, but sorry, wish I could.
No, that's okay. Pauline, have you talked with any care partners who have dealt with it? And before I have you answer that, I should just say, with Lori's situation, which she was talking about, where the anesthesiologist was like, "Well, I got this, I know." That just puts in, again, why it's so important for hospitals and clinics, for all staff to understand dementia and become dementia friendly and dementia aware, because they don't know everything. Everybody can't know everything. And this is some really kind of new stuff coming to light and needs to have further discussion and further research on. So Pauline, with that, I'll let you go ahead and let us know if you've talked with any care partners who have someone who's maybe progressed.
Well, I have one of the women I mentor is actually in the transitioning stages to her final stage. And she is, so I have been in contact with her spouse quite a bit, over her condition and finding out how she's doing and this sort of thing. He is really a wonderful care partner, and he is doing a lot of things to try to support her. He's giving her audiobooks. She can't talk much anymore, and she mostly sleeps and doesn't eat anymore. But he plays audiobooks for her and does things like that to try to give her some comfort and relief from her pain.
Great. And Alan, can I just pull you in, because you had just texted me some information about pain and some research.
Right. So the Hartford Institute of Geriatric Nursing has a series of resources that many of them are useful. Sometimes they're accompanied by a video that actually demonstrates the use of some of the tools that they're sharing that have been developed in research studies or best practices. And this one is about assessment of pain among people with dementia. And it's about assessing pain among people with dementia in situations where standardized pain assessment tools may not work well anymore. So again, it goes back to the nonverbals, to the facial expressions, to the body language, to the gestures. There's a series of items that you need to assess while observing the person. And they were assessed to be, reliable and valid in research studies. So when we go, if we have a family member or a friend or a neighbor or a coworker, say, who lives in a long-term care home or even at home in advanced stages, and something tells us that, something tells me that the body language tells that there might be pain, this tool can help assess it. And as we mentioned earlier, it's under-detected and under-treated in nursing homes and also at home. So one of the problems is that when people in advanced stages experience pain, they may communicate it through behavioral expressions. I don't like that term, but through ways that could be perceived as behaviors. And then this starts a whole slippery slope and vicious cycle of, number one, misperception of the individual's human needs. The person is in pain or severe pain. A lot of individuals are older and they have chronic health conditions. They could have pain for various reasons and arthritis, etc. And they can't communicate it. So they're communicating it through the behavior that is then being labeled. And then we're using antipsychotic, medications that are not addressing the root cause, which is pain. And we're labeling the person, it's because they have dementia, they have behaviors, etc. So it's a vicious cycle. And that's why bringing people who can evaluate pain and training direct care staff and nurses how to conduct the pain assessment can help detect it early and then provide treatment to alleviate the pain. There could be chronic pain, it could be acute pain. Some individuals may experience pain. So, for example, during bathing, when there's transitions and their legs are touching the chair in ways that are painful, and then they're starting to scream, and then we call it resistance to care, and it's not, because the person is just trying to deal with the pain, but they can't verbalize it. So it's a big issue. It's a big, big challenge, not only in nursing home, but also in the community.
Thank you, Alan.
My father had Alzheimer's, and he was in a nursing home at the end. And one of the things that I was just amazed at is when they brought in a pianist who played music, all these people who are having who were in such a state of distress, there were women who were running around, where's my daughter, I got to get my daughter to school. There were people that were very confused, a lot of people who were very upset. And this music just brought everybody together in one room and calmed everybody down. They all started singing. And it's just amazing that we can look at other things to help with pain besides just medications. And I think music is one of them.
I think that's an excellent point. And I can't remember who said it, if it was Al Powers. I don't think it was Al Powers. I might have heard it through him, though. But he said, somebody said, which I think was right on point, why can't we give a prescription for music? It really wouldn't cost anything, or even if they got an iPad and some earphones, you're spending $60 to $100 one time versus all these medications. But we just don't go there. There's not enough money to be had, apparently, and with pharma and all of their advocates, bolstering for that, it's really difficult for people to see that some simple things can have some huge impacts. Elon?
So pain is so critically important that their advocates are saying that it should be considered and practiced as a vital sign, as one of the vital signs in the training of nurses and in the practice. In any case, I can't imagine the human suffering, the emotional, physical suffering, an individual cannot express it. So there got to be a better way to bring that ability to evaluate and treat, and again, not just medications, as you said, but how about gentle touch when the individual feels comfortable with it, or aromatherapy or massage therapy when the person feels comfortable with it. The issue of intimacy. I mean, so you can bring different modalities to provide that physical comfort that maybe could alleviate some of the pain that you're experiencing. To experience pain alone may be harder than to experience it with somebody who is connected to you, is looking at you, is touching you in a gentle and supportive way, that you feel acknowledged and affirmed with your experience.
I think it's interesting about the vitals, because that would be really easy to do, even if there was a big chart with numbers 1 to 10 on it, where maybe somebody couldn't speak, but maybe they could look at a number, maybe they could touch a number. I mean, just depending on where they're at. And there comes a point where that just might not work. Just like when I remember my mom for getting her eyes tested, we went from the regular eye test to the children's eye test, where she could identify pictures of animals, but she couldn't identify the numbers or the letters anymore. And then it was kind of all lost. But yeah, looking at alternatives, and that is something that I don't think is given the same weight. A lot of times when you go into the doctor, they'll ask, are you in any pain? Some will, some won't. But I still don't think it's given the same weight as your blood pressure and all the rest, that they're looking at. And that makes a huge, huge difference. I also think that, we need to do so much more training on these nonverbals. Looking at someone's eyes, sometimes you can just tell if they're in pain or not. Lori, I'm not sure if your back was hurting or if you had your hand raised. So go ahead. Nope. Yeah.
Yes, a couple things. One, when I was involved in a research study, I had to go to the eye doctor. I forget how many times. And one time that I went, my sister was with me, and I was extremely disoriented. And I'm looking at the letters, and I found that I was signing them. And they tried to get my sister to leave the room, and she said, no, she's signing the letters. It's not that she can't see them. She's signing them. Well, as it turns out, I was very fortunate because the person doing the eye exam knew sign language. And so I did my eye exam with sign language. So I was extremely fortunate that I knew that, and she knew that, so I didn't have to try and reschedule it or whatever. So that worked out good. But I think as a whole, care partners and care providers don't always understand the person that they're caring for at all. For example, on Facebook in one of the chats, there was a woman ranting and raving how upset she was because she took her husband to the mall, thought she'd get him out, and took him to the mall, and all he did was act out, and he was horrible. They had to leave. And I responded saying how the mall impacts me. So think of it, you've got all the lights flashed and all the noise, the high heels on the floor, the kids doing the rides, the kids yelling, whatever. There's all this sensory stuff, both sound and lights. So I suggested that the next time she take them to the mall, put in earplugs and put on sunglasses. And her response was, oh, you just don't understand. You don't have the same thing he does. I think as a whole, so many people are not open to listening. They're not open to, they don't always want ideas on how to do it different. They just want to vent many times. And care providers like homes, how much time do they really have to sit and pay attention to a person? That's often so limited. So it's a tough, it's just tough all the way around. I feel sorry for the care providers in care facilities I've seen what they have to do every day and what they have to go through. And we can say all we want, well, you need to be person-centered, you need to focus on the person, you need to pay attention to their expressions, their body language. But meanwhile, you also have to disperse pills, you also have to, you've got a whole list of things that you have to do. So it's difficult. That's where so frequently the loved one needs to be involved and help with that.
Those are good points. I think in talking about the woman who really didn't want the suggestions, I think you're right. Sometimes people don't want, they just want to be right. And sometimes that's just their personality and who they've always been. Other times, I've seen and heard spouses or family care partners that they've always been taken care of, and so they don't really know how to take care of anyone else. And it's like total foreign land, and they just kind of want to go into that prince or princess mode again and be taken care of. And so, we've got so many people coming from different angles, and then there's others that are just so loving and devoted and compassionate and really strong advocates with the person with dementia. My comment for what you had talked about in a care community is sometimes I think staff and I think higher management don't understand that if people were allowed to take the time to be able to read some of these nonverbals, they would avoid some of those reactions or behaviors that really put the whole place in the stew pot, and get things kind of wild for all. But I don't think it's valued that highly as a tool. And I think you're right. I think they look at sometimes it's going to take too much time, and we could absolutely use higher ratios for staff. Elon, go ahead.
So, I think that, people can give suggestions about how to do things in the nursing home environment or assisted living. But as you mentioned shortly ago, we know there was a recent review of dozens of research studies that focused on staffing levels in nursing homes. And they found that half of nursing homes in America are understaffed and 1/4 are dangerously understaffed. That means we're actually putting hundreds of thousands of people in danger every day for various issues. And so missing pain, when you don't have time and you overwork, well-intended, well-meaning, dedicated stuff, but there's just overwork, burned out, and yes, they will miss the pain. They will miss many other things too. So, we've been talking about staffing level. I don't want to change the topic here for over 40 years, and I think it comes down to, do we care about elders in our society? And it has been extremely difficult to pass minimum staffing levels. And I know it shouldn't be one size fits all, and I know every setting is different, but and I'm not making the analogy between elders and children, but why do we have, if you're in mid to late stage of dementia, why do we have standards of staffing regulated by many states for my daughter, who is 4.5 years old, and the state will come and will check that you actually have the right amount that they think developmentally is appropriate to provide the supervision, not to mention the engagement, not to mention for people to thrive. So that's a whole different, so staffing level is a big issue. And unfortunately, even with the new federal nursing home regulations, we're still stuck with requirement for sufficient staffing, which is left to the discretion of the nursing home administrator. So we haven't moved forward much. And I had another issue I wanted to mention with regard to pain, but it seems like, Paulan, you had something to share.
I just wanted to share that the staffing level issue is a really big issue. When I left the hospital, I was pretty good in the hospital, but when I left the hospital and went to a rehab facility, the staffing ratio was 15-1 in terms of nurses to patients. And it was terrible. It was really, really terrible. The nurses were besides themselves just trying to administer medicines. That's all they did. The nurses did nothing but administer medicines all day long. and they barely were able to do that. So I know that was an issue. It was a big issue I had at the hospital, at the rehab center.
I know of 3 care facilities, and I know there's a lot more, but I know personally of 3 that now have gotten into temporary aids. They get their aids through a service, and that apparently is becoming a big thing now. Rather than when an aide calls in sick, having to give somebody else overtime, they go to a system that they're all from a service. And therefore, if you're getting aids from a service, you're missing that one-on-one contact. They don't know the person that they're taking care of. So you've got a nurse that is just responsible for dispensing medicine, and then you have aides that rotate all the time, so they don't know who the heck you are or what your body language is. So they're not going to be able to realize that your personality is different. If they come in and you're having a bad day and you're acting up, they don't know that it might be because you're in pain. They don't know you. And that's these services where you're getting temporary nurses, temporary aides. It just really is taken away from the person-centered care. That's
very true. Elon?
Thank you. So, I've done, so the issue with agency staff is a major issue, as you just described, because it goes exactly against the consistency, the predictability, the close, trusting relationship, knowing the person as a human being with a rich 60 to 90 or 100 years of rich personalized history. You talk about pain, there could be so many lifelong reasons for pain, and you walk in and you have no idea. You have no idea unless it's documented in a very high quality way, in a very concise way, and make it very accessible to agency staff or float staff coming in from another floor, another unit. So many problems can be caused by that, and so many issues can be resolved by having the dedicated assignment, the consistent assignment for an extended period of time that nurtures that relationship. And then the staff are tuned to very subtle changes in the person expressions, emotional expression, verbal expressions, physical expressions, etc. The other thing I wanted to mention about staffing is that what I mentioned earlier about staffing, with the half of nursing homes in America are understaffed and 1/4 are dangerously understaffed, it's actually probably worse because recently CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid that oversees nursing homes in America, they shifted to from a system that was self-report, where nursing homes reported on various care-related issues, including staffing, and they shifted to what is called payroll-based journal system, which is based on payroll, which is intended to be much more reliable. And we already have New York Times articles and other reports showing that for years, nursing homes were they were understating the levels of understaffing. So they realized that it was actually worse than it was used to be reported as a self-report. Now it's more reliable. So there's a long way to go, and that's one of the biggest fights, because advocacy organizations such as the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care in DC are saying for over 40 years that's the #1 issue in nursing homes. But I don't want to divert too much away from the pain. I do want to mention one thing, that one phenomena that is very relevant to pain is that we know that in general, people living with dementia are at higher risk of falls. And falls often result in pain and hip fractures and other fractures. And there's a lot of issues with prevention, assessment, individualized assessment of prevention of falls. And then after the fall, do we have not only the immediate nursing comprehensive assessment of the individual for pain and broken bones, but also hours and days after, because a person could develop the symptoms a day or two later, such as if they have a brain injury due to the fall and they cannot express it, and they're being put back to bed because everything seems fine, and then you come the next day and the person is must go in an emergency hospitalization because of severe pain and a broken rib or a broken hip. So I just wanted to mention that as part of the conversation about pain.
I think that's a good point. Lori?
People with dementia, whether they're 50 or 90, it's not just elder, but yeah, we do have potential to fall. The fifth time I fell, I broke my glasses for the third time. And the fifth time I fell, I hit a rock and cut my head right across here. Had to go to the hospital, get stitches, etc. And the doctor said to me, "You are so fortunate, you missed your eye by a hair. And that would have severely damaged your eyeball." The next day, I decided I need a walker. And when I'm confused or anytime I'm in crowds, I take a walker with me. And the reason is, as when people are coming towards me, I've lost my ability to separate them. And when they're coming towards me, such as crossing the street, I feel like snowflakes on me. And one time I actually fell backwards as people were coming towards me because it seems to me like they're not braking. So I've come to the point that I had to make a decision. Do I want a broken hip? Do I want to possibly lose an eyeball? Or pride must abide. Do I want to just bite the bullet and go with a walker? So there's times I have my walker that I really don't need it, but I never know when, boom, all of a sudden I'm going to lose my balance and fall. So that falling is a strong possibility with not only the elderly, but anybody with dementia, because your brain gets confused and can get confused very, very suddenly. In my case, I feel like I'm walking like this and I'm really walking like this, and then just boom. So I think that's an important point. And actually, when I cut myself, I didn't feel it. The only reason I knew something was wrong was I had blood all over my hands, and thought, oh, I'm hurt somewhere, because I didn't feel it. I've burnt myself a number of times, and I don't feel it when I burn myself. A couple days later, when I have a blister and it starts to hurt, then I'll feel it. But when I do it, I don't feel that pain. So in a care facility, when somebody falls, like Elon was saying, they might not know they were hurt until a couple days later. My brain is slow to say, hey, you should have pain. The one time I burnt my hand and I ended up with a big blister on my entire hand here. I don't know how I did it. I don't know when I did it, because it didn't hurt when it happened.
Good point. Elon?
Well, I remember Michael Ellenbogen, he wrote his book, From the Corner Office to Alzheimer's Disease. And I read that book. And I remember that he would even share here on Dementia Chat that he used to work in the garden or in the backyard, and then he would find a cut, and he would say, I have no idea where that cut came from. So the immediate registration, I don't know what plays into every person's different memory, but there was an issue of registering it immediately. I mean, what if you're bleeding, in a risky way, right? So the other thing I wanted to mention is, we talk a lot about memory, and we should, but I think that it is as important to also talk about the ability to, the visual. I don't want to use too many, terms that are jargon but visuospatial abilities to navigate yourself in the physical space. And then also, we don't talk enough about executive functions, which are critical. And executive functions one definition is the ability to plan, initiate, sequence, and also discontinue a task that people without dementia may take for granted. So this has to do with basically anything that we're doing, everything we're doing. So then there could be people with dementia can get into situations where they harm themselves because they may struggle with the executive functions. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation to balance it with a lot of talk about memory, as we should, but the executive function plays a big part because it puts people occasionally and oftentimes at risk of being harmed and then experiencing pain.
Good point. Lori?
I would say that memory is probably the least of my problems or challenges with my dementia. That's probably the least of my challenges. Yes, I do have issues with memory where I can't remember what I did yesterday or whatever. But it is more of the executive functions. For example, I can't add or subtract. I can't do anything with math anymore. I look at numbers and they're off. They make no sense to me. I can't make change or do bills. Those are the issues that are really hard. And I find that there's a real lack of processing time. For example, somebody says something and Elon's here in his conversation and I'm still processing what was back here. So it's a very slow processing time, which could be why when I burn myself, I don't feel it because my head hasn't processed it as of yet. I think we don't give enough emphasis on the other symptoms of living with dementia, the other challenges that go along with it. It's not just not remembering people's names or not remembering how to do things. It's a challenge of not being able to process to read a book, not being able to process what you read in the page before it, not being able to process how far a wall is. Am I running into it? Am I going in straight? There's so many other things involved in dementia, as Elon was saying, as opposed to just memory. And unfortunately, when you're in a lot of pain and you're focusing, trying to not be in pain, how can I move without being in pain? That makes your processing time even less. It's even harder to follow things and do things. Whether it's loading the dishwasher, I have to think how to do that. I don't just put them in. I have to think, okay, where are the plates supposed to go? Where are the glasses supposed to go? It's an entire think process on almost everything we do every day. And that takes a lot of energy.
Very good point. I think that whole energy point is really important, that we take things for granted and have to realize how much harder it is, how much more you have to think and how much more you're processing to get a task done or to come to a thought or recognize pain, whatever it might be. Again, the book Talking Sense is by the Dementia Century in the UK, and it is a new book that's being released, and you can also download it free if you go to Dementia Century. And it talks about all of the senses and how to help people interpret how those senses may have changed in a person with dementia. And again, as we've said a million times over all of our discussions here, is that every person with dementia is different. Every environment is different. Every care partner interprets things different. But we really have to look closely and try to figure out why there might be a behavior. It could easily be a pain related issue, for sure. Elon, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to mention that, I think that the example of using machines is a very important one, with the ability to plan what you're about to do. Let's say you use a machine, to work in the garden, okay? And the power tools understand the sequence, or to discontinue, to stop it when you really need to stop it right now. So I can see a lot of scenarios where these things can go wrong, and you did it all your life and you have the confidence and of course I can do it, and you're not going to tell me I can't do it. And then you can harm yourself. I mean, so I don't want to be overprotective, but I think that the assessment of the ability to operate machines is very important, as well as the executive functions as part of that assessment is very important. I just shared another Hartford Institute of Geriatric Nursing resource, part of the Try This series, assessment of cognitive functions among people living with cognitive impairment. So maybe that will be useful for some folks.
Thank you. Pauline, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to add that the things that Lori and Alon are talking about are the exact reasons that people with dementia shouldn't drive. That's exactly why, because of the slowed response time, the slowed reflexes, not being able to process the information quickly and accurately. And this is so many people fight the not driving thing, but it's so critical to stop driving because of these factors.
Thank you. Lori, if she had a comment on that first, and then I'll go to Elon.
On the not driving,
Mm-hmm.
Can I plead the fifth? I do still drive. Once a week, I drive to the store and back. And if I make sure it's on a day, like I wouldn't drive today. I make sure it's on a day that I am not at all confused or disoriented. Part of the reason I do that is we live in the country. We don't have Uber. We don't have taxis. We don't have buses. I think it's important for me to maintain that and make sure I'm driving once a week. So should anything happen to Roy, we're out in the country kind of by ourselves. I need to be able to take care of that. So for me, so far, I've been fine with the driving, but I'm very picky on when I drive.
Okay, great. Thank you. Elon?
I don't know, Pauline, if we had a response to Lori's comments, because she helped me ask my question to you.
No, could you repeat that? Or
well, I didn't. So my question to you, so because I'm hoping that we can, send out a message that is balanced. So what I mean by that is, we have, we know that every person is different.
right.
Every person with dementia is different. Every type of dementia is different, and even within each type is different. And there's just such a huge spectrum of abilities, even within the same form of dementia, even within the same. I know we don't. There's a lot of criticism of the stages, labeling and all that, but still, there's such a tremendous variability. We have people with dementia in early stages who are driving well and safely. But it's a very complex thing, and the assessment is complex, and it's a moving target, and you have good days and bad days. And so, but do you think that all people with dementia should stop driving, or people in the early stages could, certain people?
No, I think the people in early stages could probably drive. I think when you start noticing some of these lapses in executive function, that's one of the biggest ones. Because if you're not making good decisions when you're driving, you shouldn't be driving. And I mean, my experience was that I had minor problems with driving, getting lost and forgetting where I was going and that sort of thing. But the biggest problem I had were things that I wasn't even aware of. I wound up having a very bad car accident, head-on collision across the center line on a road with another SUV, and we were both in very bad shape. And the thing is that it was a matter of, I mean, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong, but there was just this visual, spatial thing that it wasn't happening for me, and I just crossed the center line. So there are a lot of things that it's very hard to predict, to say, well, I can drive, but you don't know what situations will occur and come up, and that's the tricky part of it. So I don't think, I don't want to say that everybody with dementia can't drive, and I know that a lot of people, that's a really big problem in terms of getting transportation to people who cannot drive. That's really what we should be focusing on, is trying to help people who can't drive get transportation. But in the meantime, you just got to be so careful with that.
Pretty good resource out there. It's called At the Crossroads, and it helps families have conversation with the person with dementia early on. And it kind of guides the family about different things that they can do. And for example, to document things that seem unusual with regards to driving. And again, not to confront the person, but to have heart-to-heart conversation, because this can be to give up your keys, the symbol of independence, the ability to practically to get to your desired destination. It's so important to us, and it can be devastating when you have to give away your keys. I remember that there was one, and there's also a big difference between simulation in a room and actually a road test. So there's all those road tests for people with dementia, and there's concerns about the way some of them are being done. Some of them are better than others. Some centers do it better than others. But one of the things that I've seen is that a woman who was adamant about not giving away her keys with dementia, the family was concerned, and then they went to an assessment. It was actually a road assessment with occupational therapists, and part of the assessment was there was a GPS that was tracking the route of the car, and then they sat with the woman and her family in a room, and they showed how the dot moved on the map. And she was in denial, or she was just not wanting to accept that she needs to give away her keys. And they showed the mistakes that she made, not to confront her, but to have that heart. We're concerned about you, Mom. This is what you saw. You went into a no entryway. You stopped when you didn't need to stop. You didn't stop when you needed to stop. You took a turn when you shouldn't have taken a turn. You got lost multiple times. And it was kind of a way. There's a reality, there's a concern, and that's kind of an objective way, one way to have that conversation in a respectful way and early on as possible. But it's a tough one. It's a very complex issue, and you need very highly specialized assessment abilities, and also to do it in a humane way.
And the problem is they don't really do it that way. A lot of in some of the states, the doctors are required to send a note to the Department of Motor Vehicles telling them that you can no longer drive. Now, I don't know if it's like that in all states, but I know it is in some states.
I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but Lori, we'll go through and let everybody have one last comment. So Lori, go ahead.
My husband drives with me once a month. And that was at the doctor's suggestion, and I think that's a good suggestion. So once a month he drives with me to make sure that I understand what I'm doing, that I'm not making mistakes. But again, I think it's important that people that are not aware of what they're doing with their dementia symptoms need not to drive. There are days I will not drive because I know I'm off. And I think that's important. I've been good to this point, and Roy always checks to make sure that my driving is safe and that I'm staying in the lines and everything else. I think if you have dementia and you're driving, that should be something that you do, is have a loved one drive with you once a month and make sure you're doing okay. Like Paul-Ann said, there are some states that when you're diagnosed with dementia, they send something to the Department of Motor Vehicles and they take your license right away. I think that is so wrong. When we went to the doctor, he did testing on perception, whatever, and he said, right now, you're okay to drive.
Thank you, Lori. Pauline, anything else you want to add?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit today.
Well, thanks everyone for your advice here today. It's always wonderful to hear what your thoughts are, and we will see you later. For our audience, if you want to share these, please do. That's why we make them.